All right, we're going to get started because we only have 1 hour and we have a lot to talk about. And we have three amazing panelists today. So we want to make sure that we tap into their wisdom as much as we can. So welcome, everyone. My name is Stefan Verhulst. I'm the co-founder of the GovLab, and I'm delighted to chair today a discussion that will focus on how can we make open data and AI more conversational. And it's part of our fourth wave of open data seminar series, where we invite key experts to start thinking about the intersection between open data and AI, and how AI can support open data, but also how open data can support AI to a large extent as well. Next slide. And as I mentioned, this is part of our work on open data, and it's also part of our Open Data Policy Lab, which is an initiative that we set up a few years ago together with Microsoft. And a few years ago, we announced that we were entering the so-called third wave of open data because we saw that there was a lot of developments in the context of open data. And the third wave of open data mainly meant that it complemented previous waves, which was initially freedom of information, subsequently, of course, the announcement and the release of open government data, but then also the creation of data collaboratives. Next slide, please. Where not only open data was published, but also private sector data was made available for access and for reuse. And so if we can look at those different waves, which kind of represents the evolution of open data with of course, the realization that not each wave has not replaced the other wave, they just have built on top of the existing waves, and also the realization that several countries are in different stages of different wave. But suffice to say is that the first wave was really about the right to know, was really about pulling data as opposed to pushing data, which was the second wave. And it was also mainly focused on the national and kind of the national environment. The third wave was then really, as I mentioned, about public and private data that complemented the second wave, which was mainly about open government data and having it available on a platform, while the third wave was also about publish with purpose, not just open by default. Now, what we try to explore today, next slide, please, is whether we are entering a fourth wave. And again, it's still very much a question mark that we are seeking to answer, where AI and open data are intersecting with each other. And they are intersecting in two ways. One is where AI, and specifically, of course, Gen AI can actually improve, where Gen AI can improve the democratization of open data. And that's specifically what we're going to focus on as well, is to what extent can actually Gen AI democratize access to data, democratize open data, but also democratize the development of AI, right, to a large extent. And that's then the other part as well, is to what extent can open data basically improve AI in terms of quality of AI output, but also in terms of, for instance, augmenting foundational models by providing access to unique data sets that are high quality so that you can actually use it for instance, retrieval, augmentation, generation, and so on, so that you can actually have specific public interest use cases as well. We published that report last year, and we thought it would, given the fact that this is such a fast-moving, dynamic environment, we thought it would be good to not just constantly update the report, but actually take stock through a seminar series. And so the first, next slide, please. The first seminar series was really about what is the importance of the fourth wave and what are the kinds of different scenarios that you can anticipate when open data is used for AI and vice versa. And today, next slide, we will specifically focus on one element, which is kind of the conversational element, or how can we democratize both access to data, but also AI development as well. And for those who are interested in kind of our constant landscaping of what's happening, I really recommend you perhaps go and check out our repository of examples on how open data and Gen AI kind of intersects, which is growing on a weekly basis. But also the idea here is to really be able to point where the fourth wave might go to as well. Next slide. And as already mentioned, today we're going to focus on one element of the fourth wave, because the fourth wave has kind of a variety of elements. One element, of course, is to what extent can you make open data AI ready, and is actually open data ready for the Gen AI area? And that's one aspect of the fourth wave. The other aspects are, of course, should we move towards more of a data commons environment, which is another big discussion, especially a discussion that is also taking place within the environment of open source AI, is to what extent do we need to have access to data commons, not just open data. But then, of course, the other elements of a fourth wave are also to what extent does Gen AI actually impact our discussions and conversations about data quality and data provenance? Because if there's one thing that we can see already is that Gen AI and the arrival of Gen AI especially has galvanized the discussion about the quality of open data and whether actually open data is ready for the AI era as well. And then, of course, today we will focus on this kind of question about can Gen AI make open data more conversational? Next slide. As I said, we're going to have kind of four seminar series. I'm not going to repeat these because they're closely aligned with kind of the areas that we have seen. So we're going to have a conversation about data commons. We're going to have a conversation about making data AI ready. We're going to have a conversation about the challenges and opportunities in general. But today, we're going to focus on conversational AI with the realization it's very hard to separate them from the other topics because they are, of course, all closely related as well. And so today, next slide, we're going to focus on the conversational interface. And so here are just a few examples that we have identified where they have tried to provide an interface with data and with open data. One, I'm not going to go into detail, but it suffices to say that there are a growing amount of initiatives that are trying to provide this kind of interface, this kind of chatbot or a conversational interface with open data. One is actually the Bayan platform, which is a platform that has been developed by the Statistical Office of Abu Dhabi, that provides access to data in a more conversational way, where you can actually type in a question and then you get a visualization back. But we see this also happening in other parts of the world, such as, for instance, in Switzerland, where they have Alva, which is kind of the interface that they try to develop with data from the canton of Basel and others as well. Next slide. And again, there are many more examples that we can point to as well. But super excited today that we actually have representatives and leaders from other examples, and also understanding and other examples that have evolved over time. And so interesting to have representatives today from USA Facts, which we will learn more about in a second. Playas, based in France, but with a global footprint, and Wobby, based in Belgium, Antwerp, but also with a global kind of footprint as well. Next slide. And so, as I mentioned, we have three representatives today. And so delighted to introduce the panelists that will explore some of the questions that I just tried to frame in a very rapid fashion to make sure that we have time for the panelists to add more insight. So we have Anastasia Stasenko, who is calling us from Paris, who is the CEO of Playas. Then we have Amra Dorjbayar, always an issue, Amra, and the same, anyway, people cannot pronounce my name either, but anyway, I'm trying to at least do a better job, who is the co-founder and CEO of Wobby, has a long-standing background in data journalism, and is also coming from that kind of field to the equation. And then we have Kari Delia, who's calling in from Seattle, who is the Chief Product Officer of the USA Facts, who tries to provide access to data about the US in a more conversational, but at least interactive fashion as well. So let's kick us off. And the first question I want to kick us off is to Carrie, to really tell us a little bit about USA Facts, right? Because I think the whole idea of USA Facts was to actually go beyond the platform of access to data, right? But also provide an interface so that people actually really understand data about the US, and eager to hear, A, what is USA Facts, but then also what's the role of Gen AI and how has that kind of changed? Super interested to hear about your journey here. Over to you, Carrie.
Great. Stefan, thank you so much for that great introduction, and excited for this conversation today. So USA Facts was born out of an idea that Steve Ballmer, who is the former CEO of Microsoft, when he retired from Microsoft about 10, 12 years ago, was starting his philanthropy. And he really wanted his philanthropy to be focused on lifting children out of poverty in the United States. And so he's a notorious data guy. If you read anything about how Steve Ballmer ran Microsoft in the 1980s and 1990s, he is notorious for being very, very numbers driven. And so, of course, he went to his little team and said, well, can you bring me some numbers from what the US government is doing in terms of poverty alleviation, and what are they putting in and what outcomes are they getting out? And his team went out and was like, whoa, this is really hard. Like, it's almost impossible, actually. Like, the data's there, but it's hard to read, it's hard to access. It took them a long time. And he said, well, gosh, that's a problem. Like, if this is taxpayer funded data, this is data that the federal government has a mandate to, federal, state, and local, I should say, governments have a mandate to collect data and distribute it, but they don't really have any mandate to make it usable or readable by the general public. And so, he kind of scanned the environment and said, there's no commercial opportunity here. It's why there hasn't been, a big effort. And so he said, I think I'm going to make this part of my philanthropic effort, actually, is to spin up this organization. They named it USA Facts, very, very literally, to simply take the open, accessible data that is, like I said, available, but not very understandable or usable by people who are not trained. That was his other vision. He wanted it to be for the general public, for voters, for people who are civically minded, who just want to be accurate in how they talk and debate and think about their country and their communities through data. And so that's how the idea was born. And what's interesting is it started out as this, I should have it here, they created this document called a government 10K, which comes from financial documents that publicly traded companies in the United States have to create. And they're these it's like a 300-page book. It is dense. And that was the first effort. And it was like, great, they got all the data, but yikes, did not pass the accessibility test. Like, very few people want to read a 300-page book about the United States government data. Some people do, but that's not like a general public. And so Steve had the idea, well, maybe we need to make a digital product that lets people actually search and look for data. And so what they spun up about 6 years ago, was a website, usafacts.org, and all it was a database and a search bar. And the first day it crashed. There was so much interest in the idea. There was a bunch of press, and then no one came back to it because, God, you actually, like, the public doesn't know what to do with a database and a search bar. They're not researchers. They can't ask questions. And so then they were like, okay, let's start creating content. So they hired this woman who's our president now, Poppy McDonald. She's incredible. She ran Politico and the Gallup polls for a while. She's very good at kind of data-led content. And they focused on creating articles, essentially. It became a blog, essentially. So we hired a small research team and a small writing team, and they started publishing great analysis, very user-centered. They started focusing on what people are searching for. So it was very kind of demand-led. People had a lot of questions about economic things and housing things. And then I joined about a year and a half ago because Steve wanted to keep the team pretty small, but he has big ambitions. And so you have to put technology in this problem. You can't grow to the scale and impact that Steve wants with a small writing team and small researchers. It'll never get big. And so we then asked the question, all right, what if what we're really good at is creating thoughtful, well-researched content with great data visuals and interactive activity. But what if we made it, first of all, a lot more scalable? So the first AI solution we did was not actually conversational, but what we did was we took the ability to say, like right now in the United States, obviously, there's a lot of conversation around education funding. They just defunded the Department of Ed and all these questions around what happens to Title I dollars, which, and so what we can do now is, before we could have written an article about that at the national level, but now we can take that article, or that essentially that research outline, we put all the data tables behind it, we put a generative AI application on top of it that's trained in our tone of voice and how we do research, and it could actually create an analysis for all 19,000 school districts in the country. So my children who go to Seattle Public Schools, and my husband's a public school educator, I can look at their districts and say exactly how much funding comes from federal, state, and local dollars in a way that's incredibly, it looks like the article was written by a person, but it's written by AI. So it lets us scale analysis but in the same way that people can just read a simple article and look at, great database. So that's been highly successful. We spent the last 6-7 months shipping that, getting that out the door, and we're using that now for almost all of our analysis. So we're able to scale it and have data update as well. That's the other big problem. Data updates constantly. And when you have an article, it becomes stale. So now for data on, say, in our immigration topics, on refugee and immigration numbers that come out monthly, the data and the whole analysis can update, which is fantastic. So that's been our kind of first frontier in AI. But to your point on conversation, that's not where we want to stop. We think what the natural thing people do when they see a analysis about their kid's school district is like, oh, what about where my sister lives? Well, what was it 10 years ago? What is it? And so we're introducing now a conversational layer, but it's not just a chatbot that's a blank search bar on a database. We learned that doesn't help the general public. It's going to be layered on top of the content pieces we already put out. So it's just going to allow you to naturally ask questions, change the charts, change the analysis. And so that's what we're building right now. We're a few months away from launching it, so I wish I had something to show today. But and we're using a lot of the technology, for example, that Amra does a wonderful job. We're using an agentic system that goes into our database, grabs the right data, sends it to our, chart service, and then generates the chart and then summarizes it, but then it will publish the data in exactly the format that people are used to seeing from USA Facts. So it shouldn't feel like a tool that has a lot of friction or has a lot of barriers to entry, and that's been our approach.
Super interesting, and thanks for sharing the journey here as well. And by the way, for those who are joining us, there is a Q&A function, which is kind of the great fortune of Zoom. Unfortunately, anyway, all of this would be better in person, of course. But the great thing about Zoom is that you can actually post your Q&A in the chat here, or in the function, and then we will try to answer those as they come in, or at the end as well. So feel free to put your Q&A in as well. So one quick question before we go to Amra, because you already referenced Amra and the great work that they are doing. So because one of the big challenges, and perhaps Amra will go into detail there, is of course the data itself, right? And so interested to hear from you, what is the current state of open data, right? Ready to actually provide the services that you are seeking to provide. Because anyway, a lot of the folks in the crowd are kind of the open data crowd, and so eager to hear, anyway, so is open data ready to provide that kind of service? And if not, what needs to happen? And again, anyway, this is a question I guess everyone will seek to address.
Yeah, great question. So there's no, right now, about half of my team just cleans and gets data ready for the system. So the answer is right now, it's actually, I think the work to get data in a format that AI systems can reliably go out and deterministically work with. We're experimenting with things like text to SQL agents and function tool calling and things that we're trying to figure out the right way. But the reality is the data is still messy and not well labeled, and the metadata isn't sufficient. And so our team spends a lot of time actually cleaning and enriching data. And so we have a data architecture where we take it from the kind of the wild, but then we enrich it in all these ways and get it into a schema that we hope, and this is where it's helpful to have the development of our AI system at the same time we have control over the schema, so we can learn like what does it actually need to do. And it's been fun being part of the open data community, because then we're sharing that out and we're working with government agencies on helping advise on how data publishing needs to change to make it more AI ready. And it's been a really robust community and a great conversation to have. But I think there's still quite a long way to go. And it's kind of early days in that respect.
Great.
Yeah.
That probably sets the stage for you, Amra, to hear about your journey, right? So Wobby. And I think the interesting thing is that anyway, you just went through some kind of a reinvention of Wobby, and but the whole idea of Wobby was initially to make data more conversational, right? Because especially based upon your kind of data journalism background. So tell us a little bit about anyway, what was the idea and where are you today?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that for us the ambition was initially very big. Our idea was, let's connect all the data in the world and make the data AI ready, and so that people can just ask a question and get a clear answer. And throughout these last 2 years, we've learned a lot about how AI works, but also about the state of open data today, and what needs to happen to really make that dream a reality. And I think we've learned a lot. And last year, the end of the year, we kind of hit a wall. We realized that we were trying to solve too many problems at the same time. So the one problem to make open data conversational is to actually have access to all the data. So in our case, we really had to make a hard copy of every data source in the world and make them, almost manually AI ready. Obviously there's some automations. So each of the open data provider, they have different standards, they have different schemas. Sometimes they share metadata, like context about the data. Sometimes they don't. And sometimes we then have to let the AI guess what the actual meaning is of the data. And we really learned that part was not in a way scalable for a small startup from Belgium to solve at a large scale. However, we did learn a lot about what needs to happen to make the data AI ready. But the other problem is how to make sure that an analysis that AI has done is accurate and reliable at all time. That's a different set of problem. Whether it's open data, whether it's company data. Essentially, what we're trying to do is using a stochastic probabilistic system like AI to result in deterministic outcome like data analysis. So and this part is very challenging, and we see that there are benchmarks of text to SQL and stuff like that. We see some benchmarks that the max that an AI model and all the technologies involved and the architecture involved reaches maximum to 90%. But 90% for an average user is simply not good enough. And we've seen it firsthand. Like, we offered to a lot of users and journalists, hey, you can use our tool, you can find kind of data. And there is a big difference between the type of questions that people actually ask towards what we show in demos. In demo videos, we show this really clear example of, show me a graph of the last quarter of these categories, and it works great. But people ask very general questions. They would say, hey, Trump said this about the education funding. Is it true? And then let the AI actually go into that and discover everything. So these are very hard challenges to solve. And I think in the last 2 years, we've seen the potential of it. And now we're at the realism stage of, okay, what is actually required to make it really work reliably? And essentially, there are a couple of things that we learned that is really required. So 4 factors really. Number one, obviously, you need good quality data. And good quality data means different from AI compared to what we understand as what good quality data means. So AI really likes these kind of flat format data that are not nested with different categories. Because sometimes if you combine them together, or if you summarize them, then it just counts it double or triple times. It also doesn't like too many columns, so you need to kind of melt the data. So that's the data quality part. But also it needs a lot of context. It needs to understand what each column means, but also each definitions and category means. But not only that, beyond the description, it also needs to understand what the limitations of the data are. So you need to feed that as well. And more recently, we learned that even if you have good quality data and you have amazing metadata, so you have everything in place, it still does not reach 100% accuracy reliably. So the third part of the thing that we right now are more focusing on, so we decided, before we try to connect all the data, let's just make data analysis accurate and reliable. And for that part, we really understood you need guardrails. Guardrails that controls, like, what type of questions can you ask and what type of questions you can't ask. And one of our more recent inventions are what we would call a query template. These are essentially SQL queries, but that are parameterized, meaning that with one SQL query, by changing the parameters, you can actually ask a whole range of questions within that specific area and trust that the accuracy, that the results are actually accurate 100% of the time. And last but not least, so even if you have all those things in place, the fourth thing is really access. At this moment, we don't have, because obviously we cannot make a copy of every data set in the world and keep it up to date all the time. So we need to have a system where we can use to reliably get access to the data. And right now, before it was, you need to have an API, but actually we're living now in the AI agents era. So in the future, it's not a human developer that is accessing these APIs, but actually what you need is a system or access system for AI agents to explore and go into, select something and filter something and take something back in multiple steps, rather than the classic API. So these are the 4, I would say, challenges technically to make open data conversational. But I would also like to take the dream beyond conversational, because this is something that we've also learned as well. So even if you have the perfect tool, oftentimes the problem is people don't know what to ask. And if they don't know what to ask, yeah, then so even if you know what to ask, you're only asking questions or questions that are known. But the most interesting thing in data is that there are a lot of things that are unknown unknowns. Like it can reveal patterns that you haven't even thought of yet. So and in the agentic era, what we really see a big potential is proactive analytics. So instead of you asking a question that's about something that, you know, given a specific domain that you're interested in, that you just get an alert like, hey, this is something that you might be interested in, you should take a look. And they would have tremendous benefits for governments and societies, that you can detect problems much earlier, or detect opportunities much earlier. And so these are the things that we are focusing on right now with Wobby. You're on mute again, Stefan.
Yeah, somehow I get automatically muted. So that's kind of an AI-driven system here that mutes me. But yeah, no, thanks so much, Amra, for this really good overview. And Oliver Wise in the blog or in the Q&A already was asking you whether you could summarize it in a blog eventually to be shared more widely. But I also like very much the end on the questions, because one of the initiatives at GovLab is to actually develop a new science of questions, because that turns out to be kind of the real literacy that is missing quite often. I mean, it's great to have data literacy, but if you have no questions literacy, then what's the value of the data? And it turns out exactly that there is a lot of potential there to also, anyway, develop this kind of AI-driven questioning. That we need better ways of formulating questions, but we can also do this with actually kind of AI as a partner, right? Anyway, as others would use kind of the term co-pilot, but as a partner for anyway, helping formulate the question. But let's go to Anastasia, and I will come back to all of you eventually, or at least depending on the questions. Thanks for your patience, Anastasia, because anyway, probably a lot of the things that were discussed, you wanted to chime in. But tell me a little bit about Playas, and so what is the vision there with regard to democratizing also kind of the development side of AI, and also how it relates with kind of what we've been talking about so far. So over to you, Anastasia.
Yeah, thank you so much, Stefan, and very sorry for a little bit of noise in the background, change in travel plans. So at Playas, we are training foundation models. So we are doing pre-training. It's a difficult work, specifically when you do want to do it in a little bit different way. We are actually pre-training on exclusively open data. Open in the strong sense of this word, meaning that we only pre-train on the content with permissive licenses. So we are based in Europe, where we do not have the same notion of fair use. We don't have fair use, and we cannot actually use the contents with restrictive licenses for training if you want to respect the European copyright law. So and as you can imagine, this has been quite a challenge to actually collect the corpus which would be sufficient to train SOTA models. But this is something that we have managed to do last year, and the real reason why we managed to do this was actually the availability of open data, governmental open data, this open data from the first and second wave of open data that you, Stefan, has been talking about. So basically, we have collected what we called common corpus, which is, as of today, the biggest pre-training corpus, biggest corpus for training large language models. It consists of over 2 trillion tokens, multilingual, fully permissive licenses. And one of the biggest part of this corpus is governmental open data. Huge chunks are coming from the French Open Data Program, which has been largely celebrated over the years as one of the most ambitious ones in the world. much of this data comes from American federal data, which is as of today is kind of threatened, and we are really happy that we have collected lots of this data before some of it disappeared. So I think that we should also think of some of the preservation efforts for the data that we believe open or publicly available or available at some time, and then it could be not anymore. There is lots of precarity when it comes to this. And other initiatives, for example, around open science. So basically in Europe, we have what is called Plan S, where all EU-funded scientific projects should publish the data and the scientific articles coming out of these projects with permissive license, right? So, we actually were, I think we are a little rebellious as a team, because we were listening, we're hearing like from labs like OpenAI, it can't be done. You cannot train without copyrighted content. You would never achieve anything of any, let's say, good result. And we kind of wanted to prove them wrong. So once we actually collected the corpus, which was sufficient enough, we trained our models. And as of today, we have published 3 models, 350 million parameter, 1B and 3B, which do actually outperform the models 10 times their size for all the tasks linked to retrieval augmented generation, understanding of financial, legal, administrative data. And this is actually not such a great surprise, because basically instead of training our models on Reddit and teaching our models to speak Reddit, we actually taught them to kind of speak legalese and to speak the language of governmental data and this kind of things, right? So once again, there is not that much surprising information here. And what we discovered along the way is that actually collecting open data can have lots of very, let's say, promising and fruitful application in the downstream use cases. Because, well, the situation that we have been witnessing in France, and most of our today's clients are French, we have been, for example, working with the French public services, developed their sovereign co-pilot. We have worked with the French Ministry of Education, and we have worked with big financial groups in France, also in Switzerland, insurers, etc. What we have been seeing that even the government, as of today, doesn't actually have access to processed open data, unstructured open data, and basically everybody, starting with the government, with the ministries and administrations, finishing with the companies, recreate the same data sets based on open data for their AI applications. And it's an important part to insist on this, because I think that what has been done for structured data has not been done for unstructured data. And there is a lot of potential to actually also using AI tools to prepare this data so that it can be leveraged in a ETL like way for downstream applications, which are most of them conversational. Basically, we almost all use cases that I'm encountering on the market, they want to be factual AI, and for this you need to have retrieval augmented generation, or let's say knowledge graphs behind. It depends on the exact, let's say, technological way that you want to choose. But in any case, you need to ground the LLM. You use the LLM more as of a tool, to process data, to go through, to reason over it also, but not as a database itself, right? Because, and this is specifically the case because most of the LLMs, even open weights ones, we don't know what they're trained on. And I mean, ours, yes, you can know what they're trained on, but we do not pretend to be able to replace, the whole whole panoply of models and the utility that they can present. So, and from what I'm seeing is that we're now having a very unique opportunity to actually to actually prolongate the efforts of open data initiatives from the third wave, right? Like to for the second wave, and to go further with the AI tools. And I think that the real problem that's kind of slowing us down is the lack of transparency of most AI labs as of today. Because of course, OpenAI has collected this data. Of course, Anthropic has collected this data and processed it. When I'm saying process, it's very important because most of this data is actually locked in horrible PDFs, right? It's actually unstructured open data. It's mostly PDFs. For example, we have collected over 100 million governmental PDFs with not only with laws, but financial reports, lots of interesting and very important stuff, both upstream and downstream. So, and the problem is that it's open data. They process it. They get value out of this very nicely, actually, or very factual and good data. But then they do not contribute back, and this is a real problem. I think that, and this is a common good. This is open data. This is not something that present, I would say, any kind of danger for them to share. Also, could constitute a very valuable contribution, but unfortunately, we are not exactly there. So we're trying a little bit to change this, and just a small announcement. In 2 weeks, we are going to publish the data set, which is called Open Government, and which would consist of over than 500 billion words, and which would constitute the biggest collection of processed governmental open data, international ones, so not only European, but also American, etc. And there will be lots of documentation in it also, because we do offer provenance information as well as lots of metadata, even classification information on the granular document level, which is also something that can be then leveraged in the downstream use cases, right? When you want to actually take, okay, just a part of the data set and ground your assistant and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, there is lots of work to be done, but I think a very important part is actually, how open can stay open. So it's like such a valuable resource, and I do think that we can all contribute to it in a more intensive way, let's say so.
Super interesting, Anastasia, and for a variety of reasons, right? So one is the issue that exactly when we talk about open data in an AI environment, we talk beyond structured open data, right? Because typically in the past, open data was kind of tabular data that was made available on a platform. So that's kind of one element that is super important to emphasize, perhaps. But also exactly that some of the use cases, and these were also the scenarios that we saw, by the way, in our report, are actually more at the downstream area where you actually use RAG models to augment existing models, but then in a way that can provide fact-based answers. Which then the question is, of course, is actually, are the foundational models kind of providing the conversational opportunity, but if augmented, to actually start providing that kind of function as well. But I want to go back to perhaps, and again, I'm always sensitive that I'm not the only one asking the questions, but that actually the audience who are joining asking the questions. And there are a few questions already that Oliver is also asking too, and perhaps Amra, Anastasia, and Kari, you can perhaps answer the question, which is, given the fact that it's so hard, Anastasia, and it seems like that's what you're doing, right? So, given that it's so hard to process the data, that there is so much waste in fragmentation of actually doing this, right? And then many are doing it, but then don't share it in a way that actually can be leveraged. Is there need for this whole concept of data commons that would provide access to high quality processed data in ways that is AI ready, so that you actually have kind of a new infrastructure to support innovation and potentially also support this more conversational ways of engaging with open data as well, because it seems like a lot of the pain points is actually in processing it, as far as I heard. but not only, as Amra, of course, have emphasized as well. And perhaps, Anastasia, perhaps you can start with that, and then I go to Carrie and then Amra. But you mentioned you're gonna share some of the data back, right? And so tell me a little bit about how you're gonna share it, what are the conditions? Is this kind of a new commons? And more importantly, what the question was with Oliver, right? Is this actually also a function that government should do or others should do, so that it's not just, anyway, kind of a private startup that tries to, anyway, give back to society, which is great, but obviously, anyway, there are kind of, is this kind of more of a public good that needs to be established as well? So over to you, Anastasia.
Yeah, thank you so much. I 100% agree that that is a much needed service, both actually for citizens and for the entire economic ecosystem, to be fair,
Right.
because the efforts are being replicated by multiple companies at the same time, by individuals even, or startups such as ourselves. So yes, totally. However, the real problem is that there is no funding for this, because this doesn't go into any kind of budget line of any organization. And I'm saying this because we have tried. We have tried to find money to actually fund this. And as of today, we are funding it ourselves, being bootstrapped and just doing this because we do believe in it. And we know that in any case, we'll be able to commercialize these downstream solutions based on this good that we are making public. So as of today, what will happen is that we are actually keeping the workflow for processing data to ourselves, and we are publishing the final results. We'll be publishing on Hugging Face, which is also a big question. Should it be on Hugging Face? I'm not really sure, but it is the only way to share it efficiently as of today. On the European level, there is a couple of initiatives, not initiatives, but actually big European projects, notably Altidic. Altidic is a consortium of over 60 partners financed by the European Commission to work on the data commons for AI.
Mm-hmm.
However, yes, this exists, but the time that they want to create something is like in 24 months.
Right.
In 24 months, like I'm not waiting for 24 months to do something that actually is needed now, and for reasons also linked to our democracies. I'm sorry, but like I do think that implementing chatbots of any level should be accompanied by grounding in the vetted data with exact provenance. So
Right.
if we do not create this data commons now, I mean, we will have cascade negative effects on the whole of society, starting with private sector, which, I mean, in many cases, they don't care. It's like, yeah, okay, let's use ChatGPT. It's amazing. Well, great. And then you have problems, right? So, but I mean, I do think that it's important. And I believe that, yes, unfortunately, as of today, from my discussions, for example, with the French government, this idea of making open data AI ready is not something necessarily that has made its way in their strategy, because there is also lots of magical thinking that powerful AI models will resolve all the issues, right? So they just like plug Claude somewhere and it will understand everything. And now you have new reports, for example, on how Claude was used for actual European Commission and how bad results were because there was no grounding in their own data, which is insane, right? But I mean, we have lots of also educational work to do so that things can start happening.
Great. Thanks so much, Anastasia. Carrie.
Yeah, I was nodding along so much when Amra in particular was talking, because I skipped over a few years of USA Facts history, but a couple of years we spent trying to build this interoperable mega database, and like it was impossible. It was impossible because of this lack of data commons. And so it is the problem to solve, I think. And I'll compliment Oliver and his team on pushing the ball forward in this way, in a with all the work that Department of Commerce has led. But gosh, like it is, I think it is impossible for any whether you're a philanthropy like USA Facts or a startup or anything, to solve this problem without a big standard, and then incentives to conform to it. And yeah, it is the barrier for us as well. It's why we're focusing on the conversational experience on top of kind of already bounded data analysis that we've already done, because it's to us, we think it's the best user experience for our, again, generalized users. And I loved your concept of like a new science of questions and predictive analytics. I think that's more the direction that we'll go given our audience, but it's still limited because of the cost and time and impossibility of maintaining all these disparate data sets and getting them ready. Yeah.
And so, and then I'm going to you, but so the question is quite often, we need a data commons, right? But don't we need multiple data commons? I mean, that's kind of the question, is do we need one, or do we need a variety? Because again, depending on the domain, right? I think we may want to actually have, anyway, a variety of data commons, right? And I'm just thinking in terms of, anyway, other particular kind of data commons that you would say, well, we need one on this, we need one on that, because I think, anyway, it cannot just be one big, anyway, I understand, Anastasia, that you want to have one big corpus, right, which is easier, but ultimately, I think there
For
are
sure.
different elements.
Yeah.
Right?
And I'm probably not the expert to speak on this, but like geospatial data has such a different looking, I mean, there's been a barrier. Google Data Commons, it has a fantastic idea, but it doesn't work for geospatial data and all these things. So I do think there is a need for diversity there. Yeah.
Okay. Amra.
That's really a great question, and I have been pondering about it for a long time. And I'm always skeptical a bit about top-down approaches, like, government has decided, oh, we need open data, and then it gets implemented. It takes a very long time to actually done, and when it's done, the quality is it's not fast enough, and by the time it's there, there's something much better there. And initially, Bobby was, initially my thought was, oh, we could do this actually in our public broadcasting company, because it was for journalists anyway. But I realized that before the first line of code would be written, it's going to take at least a year and a half or 2 years. And so doing it in a startup was really the most efficient way to do this innovation myself. So in that sense, when you could talk about data commons, I think it's not just like, what it should be, but it needs to have some kind of two elements I can think of. There really needs to be like a bottom-up movement, because you need the people from the statistical bureaus, those guys. For example, I know in Belgium there is one person at the Belgian Statistical Bureau who has been passionate about open data, and who is the only person responsible for the open data. And so you need that kind of person to activate them, to take up the effort to put it in the data commons and stuff like that. But on the other hand, on the top level, you need a bit more governance. What is the quality level? What is allowed? How should the metadata be? How should the all these schemas and that kind of thing? So you really need these two type of movements, and I think that. For me, like Wikipedia is a great example of something like that, because on the ground level, it's just people writing up information. And when I was a student, they said, you're never allowed to use Wikipedia because it's not of high level. But now when you look at it, like, what's better accurate than Wikipedia? There is something about human aggregate knowledge that is really strong, and that's exactly what AI and large language models are. They're just trained on our corpus of whatever aggregate of human delivered answers and information. So even if you have like models like Grok, which was supposed to be this free, completely liberated AI who's not woke and all that kind of thing. If you use Grok and on X and ask it to fact check something, it gives quite good and balanced answer because it is based on the aggregate knowledge of collective human information and intelligence. In that regard, I also really like initiatives like Hugging Face, where there is kind of like almost organically grown way of how we should share models with each other, which models are needed, which information is needed, how should the tags be. So yeah, that kind of dynamic systems is really needed to make this kind of data commons work.
Cool.
I think.
Great. Well, I had anyway kind of 20 other questions that I was planning to ask you guys, but before, I don't know what happened, but we are at time. And this is always the challenge of having very knowledgeable people on a panel, is that anyway, before we get into the kind of the detail, we are out of time, and I'm always super sensitive to making sure that we don't go over time, because otherwise people will never come back. But with that, I think there are massive amount of learnings from today. Thanks for sharing all your journeys, because I think you've all been on a journey and have proven that it's not straightforward, but there are pathways forward, and that you all have basically contributed to kind of building foundations that people can build upon and can also leverage as well. So we will share the recording with the wider public, also extract some of the lessons. And I'm sure that we will be back in touch, because one of the initiatives, by the way, at the GovLab that we will release soon, within the next few days, is around data commons. And so we will definitely try to connect with all of you towards that end as well. Thanks, Anastasia, Carrie, and Amra. Thanks also for, anyway, the short time that we had today and your willingness to be with us. And thanks everyone for joining as well on a Friday afternoon. Have a wonderful weekend and be in touch. Take care. Bye-bye.